physical activity and movement by extension is there as a number one reminder of the capacities that you need to maintain in your daily life, right? So 92-year-old Okinawan women can get up off the floor without using their hands. They have greased that groove for that skill their entire life. And if you use something like that is highly skill dependent as a measure of total health, well, you're going to have a bad time.
Welcome to Corporate Warrior, the podcast that brings you the best advice on how to improve your health, optimize performance, and maximize productivity. With your host, Lawrence Neal.
This episode is brought to you by ARX, aka Adaptive Resistance Exercise, the most innovative, efficient, and effective all-in-one exercise machines I have ever seen. The ARX uses a computer-controlled motor to give the exact amount of resistance your clients need 100% of the time. This means that the resistance can never become dangerous, is intuitive and simple to use, and can provide you with all of the results you and your clients are looking for in a fraction of the time. ARX is highly effective and efficient in delivering all of the benefits of exercise, including increased strength, muscle mass, cardiovascular conditioning, bone mineral density, and injury recovery. As well as being utilized by many high-intensity training trainers to deliver highly effective and efficient workouts to their clients, ARX comes highly recommended by world-class trainers and brands, including Bulletproof, Tony Robbins, and Ben Greenfield Fitness. I was really impressed with my ARX workout. The intensity and adaptive resistance was unlike anything I've ever experienced. I love how the machine enables you to increase the negative load to fatigue target muscles more quickly. I love how the workouts are effortlessly quantified. The software tracks maximum force output, rate of work, total amount of work done, and more in front of you on screen, allowing you to compete with your previous performance to give you and your clients real-time motivation. To find out more about adaptive resistance exercise, please go to arxfit.com and help support my show by mentioning Corporate Warrior in the How Did You Hear About Us field. So again, head on over to arxfit.com and enter Corporate Warrior in the How Did You Hear About Us field to support the show. This podcast is brought to you by HitUni.com. HitUni.com are a provider of amazing online courses for high-intensity training qualifications. HitUni comes highly recommended by the best in the field, including Body by Science co-author Dr. Doug McGuff, Discover Strength CEO Luke Carlson, and trainer and founder of Baye.com, Drew Baye. It was founded by my friend, author, and longtime personal trainer Simon Shawcross, who's also been a guest on the podcast. Simon has 15 years experience training clients and has supervised over 15,000 high-intensity training workouts. Using knowledge from experts like Skyler Tanner, Dr. James Steele, Dr. Ellington Darden, HitUni is a goldmine for learning everything to do with high-intensity training. The courses are delivered online through the website, where you can learn via a variety of multimedia materials at your own pace. There's online support and a discussion forum where you can share ideas and ask for help. To learn more about high-intensity training and improve my own results, I started their personal trainer course. The content is amazing, the courses are really easy to follow, and each section is organized into bite-sized chunks that give you a real sense of achievement after you complete each one. I should also mention there is a DIY course, so this is the course for you if you're not necessarily a personal trainer, but you want to learn more about high-intensity training and how to implement it for maximum benefit in your own exercise regime. To get your exclusive Corporate Warrior 10% discount on any course you purchase, simply head on over to hituni.com, that's HITUNI.com, and enter the coupon code CW10, that's CW and the number 10. So again, head on over to hituni.com, pick your course, and enter the coupon code CW10 for 10% discount. Thank you for your support. Hi guys, I am Lawrence Neal and welcome to another episode of Corporate Warrior. Quick tip, journaling. Whenever I journal in the morning, I always have a better and more productive day. I either do stream of consciousness or morning pages, which is basically just one A5 page where I just write down whatever I'm thinking about and try and work through my thoughts, or I will journal about what I'm grateful for and what my goals are for that day. Whenever I do this, I have a more productive day and encourage you to give it a go. This podcast teaches you how to optimize your high-intensity training protocol and your high-intensity training business to help you achieve your health, fitness, and business goals. I've interviewed many of the top experts in high-intensity training and HIIT business and related fields, including Dr. Ted Naiman, David Landau, Ryan Hall, Dr. Brad Schoenfeld, Mike Lepowski, Roger Schwab, Dr. James Fisher, Dr. Doug McGuff, Luke Carlson, Bill DeSimone, and many, many more. I have a special treat for you today. This is part one of a roundtable discussion with Ryan Hall, Drew Baye, and Skyler Tanner. Quick intro, Ryan is owner of the Exercise Science LLC and contributor to the chapters on genetics and body by science. Drew Baye is one of the top HIIT trainers in the world and owns the very popular high-intensity training site Baye.com. Skyler Tanner is a world-class trainer, speaker at multiple conventions, including the 21 Convention, the Ancestral Health Symposium, and he's also owner of Smart Strength. Combined, these guys are some of the top trainers on the planet. You'd be hard-pushed to find a podcast with as much exercise intellectual horsepower in one episode as this. In this episode, we discuss the most underutilized and overutilized concepts from Arthur Jones that are used in high-intensity training today, what percentage of the stuff we geek out on really matters. We talk about what is the optimal training frequency and what exercises will nurture good overall health and posture, and much, much more. This was a really awesome experience. It's quite surreal when I'm sort of sitting there in the moment thinking, wow, I'm talking to three of the top minds in exercise science all at once, who all had such great rapport, and there's a great vibe between everyone on the show, which makes it a really enjoyable discussion. For all the show notes and links for this episode and all episodes, please go to corporatewarrior.org, and don't forget to hang around at the end to learn how you can subscribe onto my email list to get a free ebook of transcripts and weekly updates from me. And now I give you part one roundtable with Drew, Ryan, and Skyler. Okay, so first question, and I wanted to ask Skyler this one first. Which of Arthur Jones' ideas do you think have been underutilized or even ignored by the HIIT community? And which of his ideas do you find yourself strongly disagreeing on the most?
Sure. So the Arthur Jones ideas that are underutilized, I mean, the basic reading between the lines was just the value of hard work that had the lowest risk of injury. Now, within Medex and Medex Medical, he went lowest risk of injury ad absurdum, where he had, a lumbar extension to reduce body torque that was turned 90 degrees, so the person was actually sideways. I mean, it got really crazy, but you can see this the culmination of this in the conclusion, which kind of informs Drew's Kratos idea, with the idea, he said, you're going to get as big and as strong as you possibly can with chin-ups, dips, and squats if you work them long enough and hard enough. If that time interval in which you stick to it is long enough, you're going to get there. The idea strongly disagreeing with that, well, see, but I would say that the machines are ultra necessary for this. It makes it very convenient, right? It makes it easy to work around people. I trained an 88-year-old earlier, utilizing, pullover machine, dip, ARX. It all makes it very, very convenient. But I think because that was his product, the assumption was like that was necessary rather than it was extremely useful. And then maybe some of the components, I mean, Drew's beaten this horse dead. The idea of muscle friction as some sort of contributing feature to going to muscular failure, there's no evidence for that. That is compelling in any way, shape, or form. People will read it as the gospel. It's amazing how some of the people who are most atheist really worship Arthur Jones. It's like I don't have a beard in the sky, but I've got a curmudgeon-y guy in Central Florida, and that the word is law. Reading in between the lines of what Arthur said, I think is much more valuable for trainees over the course of their lifetime.
Cool. Ryan, what are your thoughts on that? And also, just, I guess, I would like to hear you elaborate on, I guess, what Skyler was saying and your thoughts on Arthur Jones's ideas. But also, what biases do you think the HIIT community are most susceptible to?
I probably agree with the vast majority of what Skyler just said. I think what has been overlooked the most in Jones' work is how he evolved in his later years. You have a lot of people that may read some of the older work, the Nautilus books, and his Nautilus principles, but how he evolved later on was very similar to the way Metzger evolved later on, and also some of the data that I've collected, where he said, he talked about several people that he trained and how he said it took him so many years to find out that less sets were better than more, less exercises were better than more, less frequency was better than more. Where he actually, if he trained, there was a guy he trained that if he trained once a week, he got weaker. Once every 2 weeks, if he trained him, he maintained his strength and only got stronger having trained once every 3 weeks. And Arthur later said that, the majority of people could probably only tolerate 1 day a week. Some people would need once every 2 weeks, and some people would need a longer time to recover. So I think that has been very, very overlooked, and that correlates strongly with what Metzger also, wind up studying, and part of the data I collected also. And so there's lots of things that Jones said that he was making. I want to say he was making guesses or assumptions, okay? And people just like Skyler said, took it as gospel, okay? Intramuscular friction as a big one, that there's always this 20% between concentric, eccentric, and isometric strength, and there's probably a reason. There were answers for that already, like force velocity curves from muscle physiology. Some of the stuff you said on, some people could only recruit 10% of their muscle fibers at one time. Other people can recruit 30%, and that was the reason for failing at a certain number of reps, and that's just not true at all. That's most subjects with even a little bit of practice can recruit damn near 100% of the available fibers for a particular exercise at one time.
And Drew, I'm sure you've got some thoughts on the how Arthur Jones' ideas have been, have evolved, and how those that are underutilized or those that you find yourself strongly disagreeing with today.
Oh boy. Well, we could go on and on about this. I met Arthur in 1997. Jim Flanagan introduced me, and I was fortunate to be able to regularly speak with him by phone. I should clarify that you don't speak with Arthur. You call and you ask a question, and then he lectures you for about an hour. And same, you've interviewed, I think, David Landau before. David would go to visit Arthur at his home in Ocala frequently, and a lot of times when he was on the way up there, Orlando is on the way, so he'd pick me up and we'd go and talk with him. And towards the end, Arthur did not want to talk about exercise. If you brought up, especially if you brought up Ken Hutchins and certain other people, he'd get a little bit irritable. But when you got him on the subject, he definitely did change his opinions over time about a lot of things. And some of this was based on the work that they were doing at University of Florida with MedX. And I think a big part of the problem is there's so many people out there who look at his writings in Iron Man and the Nautilus bulletins from the 1970s, and they just think, this is it. This is, the word of Arthur, and this is high intensity training, and this is exactly how it needs to be done. Whereas, a couple problems. First off, when he was doing all the stuff initially at Nautilus, he was mostly interested in and working with athletes and bodybuilders. And there's a lot of benefit in that. But, and I know we've talked about this before, when you only work with a specific population, you tend to form opinions and beliefs that are based on your work with that. And if you don't keep in mind that there is a lot of variability in not just, the goals, but also in individual response, and that some of these people, these bodybuilders and these athletes, are going to be so far to the right to the bell curve of everybody else that a lot of the stuff does not apply if you just look at this is how they did it. You have to say, not, okay, this is how he trained these people. You have to say, what are the principles behind how he was training these people? And how can we apply this to people that are way to the left of the bell curve, which is the majority of people that are looking for information on exercise? Anyways, couple things that he changed his mind about. Definitely the volume and frequency. Later on, he said that if he had to do it over, he wouldn't have people training 3 times a week doing 12 to 20 exercises. He'd have them training twice a week doing maybe 7 or 8. So he definitely changed that. Something else that a lot of people get wrong is if they've seen pictures, or not pictures, but video of Arthur training people, he generally pushed these people to train very, very hard, but they were using awful form, just absolutely terrible form. Unfortunately, a lot of people, even in high-intensity training, they pay lip service to good form, but most of them have absolutely no idea what really good form is. And the few people that I've talked to who've actually personally witnessed Jones training said that when he did, he moved like a machine. Stoic, face relaxed, very in control of his movements, not swinging the weight up and down and thrashing about. That he used really good form. And I think if more people had witnessed that instead of the kind of crap that he allowed some people to get away with when they were doing some of these videos, they might have a better appreciation for what he meant when he said things like you should move as fast as possible while still using good form. A lot of people, unfortunately, their idea of good form is very different than what his was, and they don't know what his was because all they've seen of it was what he was letting other people get away with. He was wrong about a lot of things. Fortunately, he was right about a lot more than he was wrong. But I think a lot of the stuff that he was wrong about, you gotta give him credit because he was doing the best he could with the information available to him at the time. And a lot of his thinking on this was influenced by his experience with other things, with animals and with aviation. So he was making analogies from that, which a lot of times what he came up with was a really good fit for what he was observing. It's just later information showed that wasn't the case. An example would be, again, like the friction theory. There's friction in everything. So you can't say that friction doesn't affect it. It's just the scale that it affects it on. And when we're talking about movement in the body, your body does an excellent job of reducing friction to almost infinitesimally small levels where it needs it. The friction in the joints with the synovial fluid is so low. It's incredibly low. And it would make no sense for us to have evolved with muscles that had a high enough level of friction that would cause the difference you see in positive and negative strength if our joints had such low friction. It makes no sense from an evolutionary standpoint. And it also doesn't play out if you look at what happens with the force velocity curve. If it was friction, then you would expect that changes in both eccentric and concentric contraction velocity would result in roughly similar differences in lowering and lifting strength, because you get your static friction and your dynamic friction. But you don't see that. You see with eccentric, regardless of the eccentric contraction velocity, the strength is relatively consistent. But it's your strength, the tension a muscle is capable of contracting concentrically when it's shortening is inversely proportional to the shortening speed. If it was just friction, then we'd expect to see a curve that was mirrored on both sides, but we don't see that. Concentric looks like one thing and eccentric looks like something completely different. Whereas suppose you took a big heavy wood block and you put it on an inclined plane. If you were to push it up at different speeds and then let it down at different speeds, well, the friction wouldn't be that much different. You get your static friction, you get your dynamic friction. The dynamic friction would end up being roughly the same regardless of the direction that it was going. You don't see that with the muscles. And I'll let Ryan talk about where that 40% difference comes from, because we talked about that before, and he's actually gone and looked at all the stuff. But the other thing is pre-exhaust. A lot of people in the high-intensity training still cling to pre-exhaustion as if this is like something that you've got to do if you want to work the muscles as hard as possible. And again, it's an idea that Arthur had, and it seemed to work well, but it turns out that it makes little difference if you do a pre-exhaustion where you do a simple movement and then follow that immediately with a compound movement that involves the same muscle group, or if you do it in the reverse. And it doesn't seem to make that much of a difference if you rush from one to the next, or if you do one and then take a few minutes and do it later on. And actually, I think it was James Steele and James Fisher that not too long ago did a study on this. And there were also a couple others that showed, and again, obviously this depends on the style of performance, depends on the equipment used and other things. But if you're doing a compound exercise correctly, that you're still going to very effectively address those muscles that are in the torso. That I think a big mistake, another big one, is people have this idea that your arms are a weak link in compound exercises. That somehow if you're doing a bench press or if you're doing a pull down, that you're going to be limited in how effectively you work your chest or how you work your back because your arms are going to fail first. People have this idea that your muscles in your arms are so much smaller than your torso muscles, and I think part of it is because they are maybe not they don't have as good of an idea of just how much cross-sectional area these torso muscles have, because they're not seeing the depth of them the way that you can see your biceps or triceps. And there's not a couple things. It's not that much difference in size if you were to look at cross-section area between some of these. And from an evolutionary standpoint, it would make no sense to have muscles in the torso that were so much more powerful than the muscles in the arms and shoulders, because why have all that extra ability if you were not going to be able to use it because of the other limitations? And the other thing is that the ability to use a muscle, not the force that it can produce, when it's contracting, but how much of that force can be used to interact with your environment depends on the levers. And if you were to take, here's a good example. Something like a bench press. People talk about, the triceps are a limiting factor in the bench press. Well, a lot of that depends on how you're gripping the bar. If you have a narrower or wider grip, you can change that relative proportion. For any individual, based on their limb lengths, there's a position, there's a grip somewhere in the middle where the work is relatively even. So a lot of times with these exercises, having an equally effective stimulus for the muscles of the torso and the muscles of the arms, or in the case of things like squats, leg press, muscles of the legs, is just a matter of doing the exercise correctly. So that and that's a whole nother thing. A lot of people don't.
No, sorry, Joe. I just want to wrap up that section because I want to move on to frequency. But is there any sort of last points, you wanted to make on that?
No, that's pretty much it. Arthur got so many things right. So, I don't want to sound like, he just screwed this up and he screwed that up and everything. He was absolutely brilliant. You have to consider all this stuff in the context of the information he had available to him at the time. And also consider a lot of people, again, they're looking at the stuff he wrote back in the 70s. How many people have read any of the newer stuff, the lumbar spine, the cervical spine, and the knee, or any of that? Real quick, though, if you have a moment, if you could let Ryan talk about where that 40% figure comes from, because there's so much nonsense out there that people believe about HIIT that's based on that.
Ryan, yeah, do you want to elaborate on that, if you don't mind?
Sure. I get it. First of all, I'd like to say that I think Drew absorbed some of Arthur's ability to lecture.
Yes.
So
a little bit.
I looked in. So Drew and we kind of beat this like a dead horse at one point in time. So many of us here know the force velocity curve from muscle physiology, and basically what that states is that your ability to produce force is going to be greater at slower sarcomere shortening velocities. Matter of fact, as you increase sarcomere shortening velocity, you rapidly decrease the amount of force that you're able to generate. And that has to do with there's a certain rate of overlapping between actin and myosin contractile proteins. Okay. Now, one of the things that I noticed in looking at much of the work that Jones had done on this, 20%. So like if you could hold 100 pounds, you could lift 80 and lower 120. Okay, we're actually much stronger eccentrically if you look at the force velocity curve, anywhere from like 150 to 180%, depending upon the study that you look at. But much of the work that Jones had done was on the servo-powered isokinetic devices that were actually under Nautilus before he invented MEDX. Those were never made available to the public, but he was doing all the research on that with a servo-powered isokinetic leg extension machine. And he was having him do, it was 25 degrees per second, if I'm not mistaken, right, Drew? So, yeah.
Oh, boy. It ended up being about 4 for the excursion on the knee extension.
Yeah, it was 25 degrees per second, which the leg extension machine was 110 degrees. So we're looking at a little bit over 4 seconds on the positive and eccentric component of the movement. So if you kept the speed the same, and that's what isokinetic does, is same speed, that's basically what it means, then, yeah, you're going to notice a standard variation between the concentric, isometric, and eccentric strain. So it's that he was looking at everyone that he was trained at that speed, and that would dictate the variation.
Good stuff. I want to move on to training frequency for a moment. So I don't know if you guys have had the time to listen, but there's a number of different opinions on training frequency on the podcast. You've got some people that believe, and I appreciate there's enormous variability, and we can get into that, but you've got some people that believe that very infrequent, kind of once a week or less, is just as good as 2 or 3 times a week, and maybe even better. And then you've got I think Jeremy Lenike's group put out a paper recently that James Steele and I discussed, and I've had discussions with other people about how actually more frequency may be more advantageous in terms of developing muscle hypertrophy in advanced trainees. And I think people are kind of confused because they've had, Ryan, you've spoken about this, and they've had me and James talk about this, and I think people are they're just a little bit confused as to what they should be doing to get best results. So, Skyler, what do you think about the whole debate around sort of training frequency and that?
Well, I mean, the training frequency element seems to be largely, if volume is controlled for it, it doesn't appear to make much of a difference at all, or at least not a significant difference. I mean, you can find some studies that demonstrate that there is some, minor improvement, but then you find others where they're, taking individuals and doing things once or twice or 3 times a week. And if 3 times a week is better, it sure ain't by much. And given a long enough time frame, it's probably going to equalize in the end anyway. Are you just getting up to the shoulder of the curve faster? And then in the ultimate, I mean, the problem with a lot of this stuff, number one, is talking about training frequency, training sets, things of that nature, is that it's like I tell my clients, I go, twice a week for your average person is probably better than once a week, but it's not twice as good. It's barely, much better, all things being equal. And better is relative, right? Because at some point you have some people, and, Ryan talked about this when people who can go to failure, like talking, like they've actively reached concentric failure, and but their depth of that effort is relatively shallow. It's like I give, some people's reach exceeds their grasp. You got to pull that horse. You got to pull the reins on that horse to keep them from breaking themselves. And other people, all the coaching and prodding in the world means they just barely get their foot in the water. So then these people, the second workout might be fine. And then you have people who are doing really interesting things around managing that fatigue. It's like Zickerman talks about his second workout as being like spine and spin. That's what I'm marketing that. Circle R. That's my second workout. Spine and spin. You do neck, you do back, you do trunk, and then you torture them with intervals on the bike. And that seemed to provide value for them. But you go deep into a lot of these studies, and even actually that's the best part. I mean, you haven't had James Krieger on, but you had Schoenfeld and talking about this stuff. But you go to his like meta-analyses, and he's great. He's like, the lowest performing group, it's like 5 cents per body part. Like I said, standardized weekly was, resulted in a substantial hypertrophy gain. But then when you get into actually like the 10 plus sets producing this much more, and it's like, well, it's it was associated with a 3.4% greater average increase. I'm going to increase my workload 200% to get 3.9% greater increase on average. Like that is, for me and for my client population, that's not worth it. Right? And it's 3.9%. Can you see 3.9%? I can't see 3.9%.
There's some people out there that want that 3.9%.
You are 100% right. You are 100% right. They're just not in my facility. They're not paying me money to train them. So it's like something being real versus something being valuable or true in that way. I think that some, going back to talking about Arthur Jones' original ideas, I think some of these individuals immediately go to the lowest common denominator, right? They start off with the lowest possible volume, even if they're relatively good shape, and they don't realize that there's certainly a work capacity element that they might not develop on a very infrequent program that they might be able to tolerate. Actually, you talked about it, Drew, with Lawrence, where Lawrence, your stressors and life factors, like, they affected your ability to do Kratos as written. Mm-hmm. And you had to go down to the condensed version. But it sounds like you've been able to add some volume back now that you're in Ireland. You don't have the stressors of your previous job. So right. This is all an ecosystem of interactions. And I know that with kids, I had to dial my volume way back because I'm not getting 8 hours of sleep or even 7 hours. It's all broken up. So the idea of these things and then there's the element of genetics and just how much of this is the high responders dragging the curve up and dragging the average up. Because, I mean, if you look at some of the largest studies, like the landmark study by Hubal et al., the researcher that everybody wants to work with, is when they have 585 male and female subjects doing 12 weeks of work, and you had some people losing 2% strength or their cross-sectional muscle area and gaining no strength whatsoever, and you had some increasing their muscle cross-sectional area by 59% and their 1RM by 250%. Same program, right? But if you take the average and you don't look at the distribution, then that is where these meta-analyses are challenged. It's garbage in, garbage out, and it gets really challenging to get all these pieces together in a way that you don't let the people who are dragging the bell curve up dictate what is the best treatment for everybody else.
Good stuff. I want to move on to another question, unless Ryan or Drew, you really want to add your opinion to the mix.
Throw some stuff in there. I'll let Ryan go first if he wants to go.
I've drilled down to the individual studies, Lawrence. I've done a lot of work on that. And it's a very let's put it this way. There were extremely small number of subjects. All of them were college-age males in these frequency studies. The one had as little as 7 subjects. And so I think the largest was maybe 10 to each group. And so we're talking about, the same. So I don't really think you can apply that to a population at large. They using all young collegiate males, doing this frequency variable and not even looking at the inter-individual variability between those subjects, because there was large inter-individual variability when you did look at them. But the one study that, Skyler had brought up and I had talked about on my podcast, even though they used young women and men, they used 585 subjects, and there was this huge variability where, the averages were much lower. Some people lost strength and muscle and other people's gained a tremendous amount. And that's not what I see with my population of subjects. I mean, we train people from all across the board. I just don't think you can study only young collegiate men. And that's something that you and I spoke about on my first podcast. If you're an academic, you're a professor at a university, what is going to be your readily available pool of subjects? Collegiate-aged males.
And often athletes.
Yeah, there you have it.
Yep. Good stuff. Drew?
Oh, man.
Keep it succinct.
Most of it, but here's the thing. First off, that individual variability is extremely important. I think a big part of the problem is that a lot of people want a simple answer, and there isn't one. The answer to almost every single exercise question is, it depends. It depends on the individual's response to exercise, which varies tremendously. It depends on what they want out of it and how much they're willing to work for it. Like you said, there are some people for whom a slight difference in results could mean, the difference between placing in an important athletic contest where there could be, a career on the line, or there could be sponsorship money on the line. And in that case, even though if you're training intensely enough, you very quickly hit a point of diminishing returns as your volume increases. The question is, how much is every little percentage point of those returns worth for you? And then you have to look at, for most individuals, what the time frame is too. For most people that are not putting, careers or multi-million-dollar sponsorships on the line, it makes no sense to invest, 10 times as much time for a small little percentage point of difference. And even if that's the case, where they are willing to do that, like I talked about previously, in the long run, and this is why the time frame is important, there is no significant difference in the results, but there is in the cost in terms of the long-term risk of overuse injuries. So you have to look at the individual. You have to look at what their body's going to respond to. You have to look at what they want out of it and how much they value it. There's no one simple thing where you say, oh, everybody should do this many sets and this many workouts per week, and you have to hit this muscle group so frequently. It comes down to the individual. How do they respond? What do they want out of it? And the other problem with that is, and this is related to also where these studies come from, is most people make the mistake of, when they want to be successful at something, they'll look at other people who have been successful and they'll say, well, so-and-so is the best at this, and so he must know what he's doing. I'm going to do the exact same thing that he did so that I can get similar results. And often they fail to consider that the results may have had to do with a lot of factors other than the particular approach. And in some cases, they may have even gotten good results in spite of an approach that was not ideal for them. Arthur liked to say the fact, and I'm going to paraphrase, I'm not going to quote him exactly, but the fact that a particular result was produced by a particular method is not proof that the same or better results could not have been achieved by some other means. So, and anyways, when we get to volume, it's also a moving target, because as you progress and as you learn to train more intensely, the demands on your body increase. Also, age is going to affect this. So over time, and also, again, looking at other stresses, you may need to change that. So there's a big problem with people saying this is how often you should work out, as opposed to this is the principle and you need to apply this based on your body, how it's responding, what you want out of it. And it's, again, a lot of people make the mistake of looking to people that are on the far right of the bell curve, when if they're looking for answers in the first place, it suggests that they're probably not getting the results they want from what they're doing. They're not a fast responder, and they're probably at best somewhere in the middle of the bell curve. And the people that need this stuff the most are usually the ones that are way on the left. And if you try to train them too much, too often, they will actually get negative results. They will get weaker, and they will even lose, muscular size, because the same program that might be fine for somebody that is, able to recover and adapt more quickly could be gross overtraining for somebody that is a poor responder. So there's no simple answers. Everything depends.
The listeners hate that answer.
That's the answer they're going to get for everything.
Here's an interesting point that I always make. If you pay attention to muscle magazines, you see the same models looking about the same year over year over year. So it tells you one of two things. Either A, you have to maintain a heinous program to keep that look, like, which we understand is you had to have that in the first place. The same reason I explain, I say, if I told you I had a training program that would make you about almost 6'3", give you blue eyes, high cheekbones, and a cleft chin, you'd go, Skyler, you think very highly of yourself. But it's an illustrative idea to the idea that just as much as I cannot sell you a program, and you already understand that, but the moment it goes from like base genetic features to that people consider immutable, height, eye color, bone structure, to something like muscle tissue, which has a certain amount of plasticity to it, they think the laws of the universe no longer apply. And that the thing that they need is some sort of Gnostic wisdom, some sort of little piece of detail that they've been neglecting this whole time, and they'll find it. So back to my point, either A, you have to maintain this heinous program to look the same year over year over year, or B, these individuals have the gift, they pick the right parents, and they continue to reap the rewards, because there's no graveyard. Magazines aren't writing articles about, here's a training program we did, it injured us, and we lost strength. Let's talk about it for 3 pages. It doesn't happen. It's like Nassim Taleb talks about. It's like it's a graveyard fallacy. We don't write magazine articles or make YouTube videos about all of the stuff that didn't work. And when the people do that, they don't get 3 million views and bumped by watching, because people like the exception. It's like the news. If it's in the news, you probably shouldn't worry about it, because by definition, it's newsworthy. Nobody's writing news about me going to the grocery store, because everybody's going to the grocery store. There's nothing novel about that. Where by definition, these real extreme responders are almost exactly the same thing as a Category 5 hurricane barreling down on Florida.
That's really interesting. I recently had a conversation with Jay Vincent, and it's funny because it was kind of a part 3 podcast, and we were sort of, because in the part 2, as you know, we were talking about business, so we wanted to do another episode where we could just focus on his thoughts, how his thoughts have evolved regarding high intensity training, how his workouts change, his diet, stuff like that. And what was really interesting is this won't surprise you actually, so it's really not that interesting, is that not much had changed at all. And in fact, he'd been even more relaxed about the principles and was still getting as good, if not better results. So we're talking less volume, less frequency, sometimes eating 1 meal a day because he's so overworked. And where I'm going with this, and I want to ask Ryan this, it's actually a question you posed, Skyler, is what percentage of the stuff that we're geeking out about actually matters when it comes to improving health and body composition and so on?
Oh, that's because to me, it's all important, Lawrence. I'd probably say, you know, and again, I have a certain population of subjects that I work with. Okay. Although I have trained people from all over the spectrum, I have trained those outliers, both on the high end and the low end. And I'd say I'd probably have a lot more people that were on the low end. And for those people to find the formula that works takes a lot of experimentation. With some of the newer genetic testing that's going to be available, because that is available now, and I'm actually going to be working with a company to collaborate with them to collect more data and more genes. It really becomes important with those people. For the quote average trainee, it probably isn't all that important. All the stuff that we're geeking out on. But
it's a lot of it's baked into a good principled program anyway.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. So but I always fall back on this. We don't train averages. We train individuals. That's the deal.
Skyler, did you want to, since you posed that question, did you want to give your answer on that as well? I'd be interested to hear what you have to say.
No, he's right. I mean, if you have the extreme either way, I remember early in my career, I had a guy who was in software and he had the gift. You know, he'd show up. This was at early days of efficient exercise, and he would show up. He looked like a rugby player. Like he had the shoulders, he had the hips. And he was in software because, of course, he was. And he'd do 4 to 5 exercises once a week, and he'd keep this up for 3 to 4 months, and he'd gain somewhere between 10 and 14 pounds, mostly lean mass. You could see it like week over week. And then he'd disappear for the remainder of the year, and then he'd come back, and he'd do it all over again. It was like his yearly tune-up of lean tissue. It was amazing. Or there was another guy who was a former powerlifter who worked for Microsoft who was training with, and he'd do like full blown consolidated routine, super slow leg press, super slow pull down, super slow ventral torso. And he was built like a brick shit house. Like he was solid as a rock. He had what Doug Holland talked about, like as the Goldberg neck, where the traps sort of entered behind the ears. There was no discernible neck girth below the jaw to speak of. But otherwise, he spent this day, you know, writing software and video game stuff for Microsoft. And so to see those individuals, a lot of times these individuals they don't have to work hard. That feeling of getting pumped up from the workout and lingering in the gym provides such a psychological boon. But to see the extreme, these individuals who can almost walk through a gym and gain strength through osmosis. And then the other people where you have to really pull your hair out. Like volume is a limiting factor. Their hard work capacity is like below. You know, if I'm moving my hand up and down here since you can't see it in the podcast. So I talk about like if we're going to push a person to fatigue, that's like reaching way over their head. These individuals' volume tolerance is like collarbone level. It is just not very much, and they break, and then it takes them forever to recover. They almost, unfortunately, have recovery characteristics of someone much older than them through no fault of their own. So these are the people that Ryan talked about, where you're talking about every other week to keep on keeping on. But good enough is good enough if you do it long enough. And the problem is that what people think is good enough is often minutia, and that minutia matters on the extremes. But mostly for the lower extreme, because as I said, the guys who are too strong and sort of big gainers, they almost holding them back is largely what you're doing, right? Because they'll work until they break. They would want to do that because they've always had a body that could meet that demand. And fortunately, the ones we tend to get here, but they were white collar guys, right? They were making money. They always had the gift. They didn't worry about it. They didn't want to be in the gym because they could always get the response they wanted. So.
Yeah. Have you all listened to Art Devaney's episode on Tim Ferriss, or read his blog and learn about his current training protocol?
I haven't read any of his stuff for a long time.
Eccentrics every day.
Yeah,
Ouch.
I mean, Drew, don't worry, I'm not going to leave you out. But I did want to, ask Skyler. You seem to obviously know about this. I heard his episode with Tim Ferriss. Very interesting that he focuses on pretty much negative only or negative accentuated training on an almost daily basis. What are your thoughts about that as an approach, where there might be why he does that and where there might be downsides?
The repeated bout effect is strong in that one.
Perfect.
So right. The repeated bout effect is just that once you've incurred a certain amount of damage in the muscle tissue, it becomes resistant to becoming further and further damaged. Now, the seed of what he's is true. So while the James, plural, over in the UK are keen on pointing out, like, the eccentric work doesn't seem to produce as much, or doesn't seem to produce above and beyond just getting the momentary muscular fatigue from a hypertrophy perspective. Definitely from an athletic perspective, there's some decent data that shows overloading the negative really accentuates the muscle spring, which you look at a lot of these track events, like running is just a massive volume of eccentric absorptions, right? So if you could find a way to overload that safely without the repetitive pounding, you could spend less time doing what these individuals try to amount. I'm laying down a base for my running. Well, if you could spend less time base building and more time on quality workouts specific to your sport, if you train in a way that would allow you to accentuate the eccentric spring, which is very specific to your activity and the muscles involved in the activity, then the eccentric work is meaningful. And I do also know that my colleague Jim Keane over at ARX, I mean, he does what he calls hateful eights 3 times a week. He does 8 sets of 8 reps of 3 ARX movements without the screen. He is not watching the screen. He just turns it on and he pushes as hard as he can that day for 8 reps. And I think he did 8 8s at one point. Now he brings it down to like 4 by 8. But because there's no carrot hanging in front of you, the eccentric is submax. And he says, I don't really get sore from this anymore. But he also hasn't gotten drastically larger recently either. So I think at some point, this goes back to that. He's also young, right? Relatively young. The idea of accentuating the negative in our older clients, I mean, I found great value with that with the ARX here. I had clients who'd been with me for 13, 14 years. Oh, Ryan, mutual client. Nick Wolverton, great example of this, 81 years old this year. When he started doing the ARX last year on an every other week basis, the strength that he could, the strength on the nitro leg press went up. It went up about 15% at the same subjective effort. And Nina did the same thing, complaining the whole way, complaining. Skyler, why do we have to do this? I don't understand. I've been trying to figure this out since I was with that nitwit Ryan. Why do I keep coming to this? I need to find a purpose in my life. Lawrence, two clients of mine trained with Ryan like 15 years ago. And Ryan made such an impression on her, and she still trains to this day on once a week basis. But my point was the eccentric overload that these people utilize on an every other week basis drastically improves their usable strength, right? And so it's very valuable in that population. So I could see why Devaney, to the concluding point, why he's focusing on that. But the doing it every other day, it's there's, he has great genes. There's no doubt. You don't become into a major league pipeline for baseball without it.
Good point.
But I do find it interesting, since we were talking about fatigue and peripheral, it's like central nervous system fatigue. Like, he is afraid of going to muscular fatigue because it trains you to fail, which I kind of think is funny. It's a little Dunning-Kruger mastery there. But also that, okay, but going to failure is going to torch your nervous system, but everyday eccentrics aren't. Like, if it's an issue of like motor unit recruitment at a really high frequency or really high threshold, wouldn't that be worse if that's actually what you're worried about? So I think of it more of like, yeah, he can tolerate it. That doesn't mean it's optimal. And I do think that the seed of it, like with aging, some eccentric overload might be beneficial for maintenance of this ability, or even regaining of some of this ability, which you had Schwab on, right? I mean, Lawrence, didn't you?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, so So that equipment has a lot of problems in a variety of ways, but seeing videos of Schwab doing it, I mean, he's clearly milking the eccentric overload that he's getting out of it, and that produced some lean tissue gains for him in his 70s.
Yeah, no, exactly. Drew, did you want to kind of give your view on negative training and negative emphasize training, just to elaborate on that?
Oh boy, yeah, I'm trying to think of a way to do this concisely because it could end up being another half an hour or so. I think if first off, one of the most important concepts, if you are trying to get the absolute most benefit out of exercise, is the idea of efficient muscular loading. Basically, your muscle can produce a certain amount of force. And that amount of force varies between the concentric and eccentric, and it varies based on the length of the muscle and the amount of the force that gets transmitted to the load that you're moving varies depending on the position of the body. Ideally, as much as possible, you want the difficulty of the exercise to match your strength in each position over the range of motion. And if possible, that should also vary somewhat between the positive and negative. It doesn't need to, but theoretically be a lot more efficient if it did that. And actually, one of the things I've got to laugh when I think about the X-Force equipment and that 40% thing, because they went with this thing that Arthur and again a lot of people believe that there's that 40% difference when it actually varies based on the concentric contraction velocity, and they didn't even use the same concentric contraction velocity. A better option would be equipment that just accommodates the difference in strength. Anyways, little side tangent there. So if you are stronger on a negative than you are on the positive, then it would be more efficient, would be more effective to train with equipment that allows for proportionally higher loading during that. There's a lot of problems with this, with a lot of equipment like the X-Force, Exerbotics, and some of these other brands. The transitions are not very smooth when you are reversing between the concentric and eccentric, and that jarring transition can cause some problems, increases risk of injury. Thing is, it's not. This is one of those things that's really fun to think about and talk about, but unfortunately it's not really an option for the vast majority of people because good equipment that does this is not commonly available. No. However, also, I mean, you could have partners assist you with this, but that's just a mess. If you think people's exercise form is bad, their ability to assist somebody else in doing things during an exercise, handoffs, spotting, and whatnot, is even more atrocious. There's a whole bunch of issues with that. But if a person wants the most efficiency, again, consider that your eccentric strength is higher than your concentric strength. And your concentric, your lifting strength, goes down as your speed, as your shortening velocity goes up. So the faster you attempt to lift a weight, the less weight you can lift relative to your strength, but your negative strength is still the same. Suppose that your negative strength, your fresh negative strength in an exercise was 100 units of force. And suppose that if you were to move very, very slowly, your fresh negative strength might be, and this is not exact proportions, this is just for the sake of example, say 80 units of force. Well, then you're always going to be underloaded using conventional equipment during the negative a little bit. But you're going to be underloaded by maybe about 20% during that negative. Actually 25 if we go the other way, because if you can lift with 80 units of force, then it's going to be 20 higher on the negative. But if you go faster, the units of force that you can produce lifting goes down. So the efficiency of the exercise gets lower and lower as your concentric speed gets higher and higher, because the faster you attempt to lift, all else being equal, the less you can lift, which means that you are going to be that much more underloaded during the negative. if a person wants the most efficient loading possible during an exercise, if they want to have as much tension positively and negatively relative to their strength and relative to the duration that they plan to perform the exercise for, they need to move as slowly as they can smoothly during the exercise. The faster you go, because the more limited you are in how much you can lift, the more underloaded you will be during the negative. So, I mean, there's some other considerations. The duration, there's always other considerations. The duration of the concentric relative to the negative is also a factor, because you are going to fatigue a little bit more quickly during that concentric. But as a general rule, you should be moving as slowly as you can smoothly doing these exercises if you want as efficient loading as possible. Now, if you have equipment that allows for safe transitions, and again, ARCS is an example of this. I've actually tried the X-Force machines, and I would not recommend them to anybody. In fact, if somebody gave them to me, I would refuse them. Or
don't hold back, Drew.
Or if somebody gave me these machines, I would have them scrapped. I would not even resell them, because I could not have it on my conscience that somebody else paid money to me for these things. They are that bad. The problem with these machines, ignoring the fact that the whole 40% difference thing is wrong, that the actual difference in positive and negative strength depends on the concentric contraction velocity. Ignoring that entirely, when you are changing direction between lowering and lifting a weight, you want to be able to reverse direction smoothly with very little acceleration, so that you don't have any sudden increase in force that could potentially exceed the safe level for the tissues involved. Same thing when you reverse between lifting and lowering, although it's that lowering and lifting where the lower turnaround, you got to be a little bit more careful. The way these machines work, when you stop moving concentrically, not when you get to the end of your range of motion, but if you stop moving concentrically, the weight stack flips from incline to a vertical position, and it does so in a very jarring way. So when you're lifting, if you stop at any point, even if you didn't get to your intended end of the range of motion, if you just stop briefly for whatever reason, it suddenly increases that load. Suppose you're doing an exercise and you feel a twinge in a joint and you stop. It's going to suddenly add 40% resistance at the point that you stopped, because you felt something you suspected was an injury. That is just, you don't want that to happen. On the other end, if you are lowering the weight and you stop, it suddenly drops it. It is not a smooth transition. And if you are attempting to lower it and then smoothly reverse direction, and suddenly the weight is much lighter, you're not going to be able to do that smoothly. As soon as you stop, you're producing a certain amount of force, but the resistance drops. You're going to quickly come up initially. You have to kind of anticipate and brace for those changes. I'm sure that with some practice, it could be a little bit less jarring, but I tested these machines with a couple people that have some of the absolute best form that I know. Josh Trentini and Al Coleman and I went to the Gainesville Health and Fitness Center about 4 weeks after they got their X-Force machine, and we went through and we tested all the machines that they had that weren't already out of order after only being there for 4 weeks, and it was atrocious. And the problems with the jarring transitions are on top of just some really poor choices in terms of the biomechanics on these machines. You would be better off if you're going to get something like that, just going and getting Nautilus Nitro or Medix. Yeah, or if you're looking for something motorized, going with something like ARCS. And I tested one of the prototypes. This is, we're talking about the negative overload for Randy Rindfleisch, who invented them. This was back in maybe 2006, 2007 or so.
I know exactly. The ancient red red display that, the user experience was awful.
Oh, yeah. The thing was a monster. And we actually saw, I had a bunch of people, I had it set up in my home. And so I had a bunch of my clients coming to my home to do workouts on this. And a couple of people had noticeable increases in muscle mass in a period of, just 4 to 6 weeks. But almost everybody just felt like crap shortly after that. But we were doing that hyper protocol, where it was a just maximum effort right from the start. And I had a couple people that were doing the double negative protocol, and it was incredibly effective, but we all quickly overtrained on it. These machines, it basically has a motor, and it moves the handles or the pad or pedal, back and forth through the range of motion. You have control over where it reverses. So, for example, a double negative shoulder press pull down, in the starting position of the shoulder press or the ending position of the pull down, the machine would start pulling you, and you would resist as hard as you could. You'd basically do a negative pull down, and then when you got to the end of the negative of the pull down, then it would push the other way while you did a negative shoulder press. And we did paired that. We did a pairing with dips in a low row. We did a pairing with a chest press in a row, and it was absolutely brutal.
Well, you said, it's funny though. I'm going to interrupt slightly because last year I had Mike Polano of ARX taking me through, training me for a short period of time, and I was doing 3 or 4 exercises. It amounted to 6 to 8 minutes of work once a week, and I've gained in about 16 weeks. I gained a little over 1.5 pounds of muscle and lost 1 pound of fat, and most of that was like in my legs. It was biased to my legs and hips. Now most of the work I was doing was in the legs and the hips, but a couple interesting things that solved that problem. The later software design where you're able to better constrain how you want to go about defining fatigue. Like a lot of my clients, they just do a minute set, right? So that amounts to 3 or 4 repetitions. Or if people like to lollygag, you'll start to see people who their teleo anticipation is, I got to go a minute. So that last negative is higher than the preceding negative or the preceding 2 negatives, and you're going like, where were you holding back on that? There's an inroad mode where you set a specific work output as measured by accumulated torque, and you hurry up and get there. Like what it does is it reduces lollygagging on the concentric, because people, the feeling of the maximum contraction through the eccentric phase versus the concentric, it could start to feel like your arms are almost floating, even though clearly on the screen you're making force. It feels like you're not getting purchased the way you do with the eccentric. So people will inadvertently back off because nothing's acting on you. That's the great the brilliancy of the ARX is nothing. You can't drop anything. So the inroad mode is like hurry up and get it. And then finally there's the I just want to do all of the negatives mode that you kind of talked about, Drew. And yeah, I don't recommend that for anybody for any extended period of time because it's just the hole you dig is so deep. Although ironically, Jim Keane, talking about him again, he talked about kind of trying to take Mentzer's ideas to the absurd degree, which was as long as he could produce more total work, he would stay at the frequency that he was at. But as soon as he failed to make that strength output, he'd start elongating the frequency. So he got to the point where he was doing a workout every 21 days, right? Like just an insane amount, as long as he could make more force. And he goes back into the DEXA scan, which itself has a certain amount of error, but it's the gold standard. And he goes, and he thinks he'd been gaining. He thought, I was like, all right, I'm on point here. And he had gained in this year period of time, like 3 pounds of muscle. Pretty good. But he had gained 15 pounds total weight, so the rest was fat. Except, kind of interesting, though, he gained like a 0.5 pound of bone mineral density.
Jeez.
Yeah, which for those of you who understand, like bone mineral density is a measure on a DEXA, that's huge. That is enormous.
Big. Yeah,
it's a big jump, and he'd already been training on the ARX. So the joke we were like, if the boning protocol is just keep pushing out. As long as you're making the force, keep pushing it out. If that was your goal, right? But yeah, he did that idea of just like maximum negatives, and as long as you can make more force, which goes back to that kind of sweet spot that we talked about of like accumulating enough work, but not so much that you're just destroyed for muscle.
good stuff. I want to move on and ask some questions around movement practices and posture. Ryan, I'm going to start with you with, so I'm going to come on to the critique of Andy Galpin, PhD's episode with you afterwards. Skyler, so since moving to Ireland, as you may know, I've been training sort of 2 to 3 times, normally twice a week, using Drew's Project Kratos, playing basketball once a week. But within that, I'm obviously working on this business, this podcast. So I've been probably sitting down a bit too much and not always assuming great posture. And I've experienced some very mild pains in my back, in different places at different times of the day. In fact, I've just bought one of these kind of mini standing desks to sort of vary my position through the day. But I guess the question I have is, is high intensity training enough? And what should we be doing as a holistic program to make sure that we don't have any of these pains and can also optimize for the other things we care about as well?
Infrequent exercise, high frequency movement. That's it, right? I mean this with all the sincerity in my heart. I'm actually having an argument with an athlete on Twitter. Not an argument. It's an academic argument on Twitter about this right now, which is largely that you look at the ACM guidelines and they say, 3 to 5 hours of physical activity a week is where the sort of health benefits, like that's the dose response curve. And that is for physical activity. Like that is moving around throughout your day. And the problem I'm going to sound like Ken Hutchins here. The problem's in the definition. It's poorly defined. Most people, you tell them exercise and they think walking to their mailbox is exercise. A 3 mile an hour, what is that? A 3 mile an hour walk is exercise. That's a 20-minute mile, is exercise. They think that all of these count as exercise. And they don't. They're physical activity. I've written 2 blog posts about this, and that structured exercise, resistance training specifically. And then there's the third, there's training, which is even more complicated because we all come up through a PE system that gives us ball games and sports as a form of exercise when they have an exercise-like effect. But my basketball example is always the same. I go, if I score 30 points, did I have a better workout? Did I have a better training, or did I have a better exercise effect? Yeah, I probably had an easier time, especially if I'm playing against constant competition, or I got hot, or any variety of things where more playing time, or these metrics are not there to measure the quality of the input that results in a physiological, a biomechanical, anatomical, and physiological change in the human subject. That is not what they are there to do. So you have physical activity, exercise, and training, and there are 3 different boxes in which you have to unpack. Exercise is to improve these measures, these performance variables that are innate, that you are carrying around with you constantly. Physical activity and movement by extension is there as a number one reminder of the capacities that you need to maintain in your daily life, right? The 92-year-old Okinawan women can get up off the floor without using their hands, not because they're yoked and have giant teardrop quadriceps. It's because they have 92 years of getting up from low tables. They have greased that groove for that skill their entire life. And if you use something like that is highly skill dependent as a measure of total health, well, you're going to have a bad time. So you need to move in a way that helps you to improve your quality of life. You need to visit it on a regular basis. It's what you talked about, Lawrence. Wow, these ketones are really hitting awesomely right now. I am cranking through these thoughts, guys. Let me tell you.
You're getting good at this.
I'm really good at this. So here's so you did this, Lawrence, when you were in London, taking the walk breaks, talking and walking on your phone when you were making a sale. Well, now you need to schedule just, movement snacks, if I'm going to quote Katie Bowman. The idea of like your Pomodoro timer. I'm working for this many minutes. I'm going to get up and I'm going to undo all the damage of being parked in front of this computer. Or I'm going to switch my desk in my standing position. Moving in and out of that. That is unquantified stuff. You shouldn't be trying to do more of it. It's like the people who mechanistically try to crank to 10,000 steps no matter what. 10,000 is an average. What I would rather see is big excursions from the mean and big big recursions from the mean also, like getting below it, having less movement for a period of time, rather than I'm going to mechanistically hit 10,000 a day, 10,000 a day, 10,000 a day. I want 20,000 one day and 5,000 the next. I want something like that with people, which is a great, that's what McGuff talks about with the almost like the polygraph, and the line goes off the table across the street, which I think wasn't that a Menser idea, a Menser example originally?
Yeah, he used it when he's talking about intensity.
Right, but I think about this is what I would want people to have. I want the physiological efforts to be off the graph like that, but lots and lots of movement. It's largely about, if you don't explore these ranges of motion unloaded, you'll lose them over time, right? It's like your mom, the grandma telling you to stand up straight. That's true, right? If you are aware of what good posture feels like and you regularly stand in good posture and you create strength in the muscles that support good posture, like your extensor group and your rhomboids, well, then you don't have to visit it with any frequency. You just don't want to neglect it with any frequency either. That is the long version of infrequent exercise, frequent movement. And that's the problem, too, is that when we're selling an exercise program, the what gets inferred is that, well, you do nothing else. Now, there are people who want to live in a hyperbaric chamber for their gains. I might miss out on 3% muscle mass. But here's the thing. Here is the thing. As much as we love resistance training, once you're out of that newbie stage or that regain stage, progress is incredibly slow because of the cost of building new tissue. Let me start with the inverse. I've been meaning to write a blog post about this anyway. If you do nothing, half 25, it's about a half a pound to a pound of muscle loss a year. Nothing, right? I'm going to err on half a pound. But let's say you do nothing and otherwise you're pretty active, right? You're just set, you have a fair amount of non-exercise physical activity, but nothing that would be considered these extreme bouts of work. And they've demonstrated that active older individuals cannot recruit muscle fibers like strength-trained older individuals, right? So you're losing something by not resistance training. But think about how small that is. I mean, a half a pound per year dry muscle mass. Once you're out of the newbie stage and you're working hard, on a week-to-week, month-to-month basis, if you're doing well, I'm getting a pound and a half to a pound to 2 pounds a year, and then eventually that peters out into really tiny numbers. Well, even if you optimize recovery, the number that you're gaining is so many zeros in front of it after the decimal point. It's just ridiculous. But some people, that's what they want. I'm not going to do anything. I'm recovering. And I forget the powerlifter. Oh, Terry Todd. There's an image of him like grading papers on his bed because he was recovering. He's like, I don't want to move. I want to maximize recovery. So I'm doing all my work lying down here, which, as we learned, of course, is the exact opposite of what you want to do.
This is hilarious because I remember quite vividly when I first started getting into, so I just read Body by Science, and I just started doing high intensity training, and I'd had a workout, and the next day I did a food shop. And I was carrying the groceries back in bags, and I actually had a huge fallout with my best friend I was living with at the time because I said, "No, I can't walk home with these. It will burn into my recovery." This is like, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, and he just went, "You're an idiot," and just walked off and left me. And it was just, now I think about it, it's so ridiculous. I mean,
we're not that fragile.
Yeah, we're not that fragile. I mean, it is truly, we're not that fragile. Then actually, there's some good data that came out of UT last year about how, and I shared it with Tim Allerton, about how if you are too sedentary, the health benefits of a bout of exercise are truncated, they're reduced. So the physical activity seems to prime the physiological pump to generate some of these health benefits that you get. What they did, it was a great experiment. College-age males, because that's what you have. And they had 4 consecutive days of either a high activity or a low activity. By high activity, University of Texas is called the 40 acres for a reason. It's pretty large, and now it's even larger than that. So if they were just walking between classes, they were accumulating something like 14, 15, 16,000 steps. I forget the exact number. 4 consecutive days. On the evening of day 4, they were on the cycle ergometer, 65% of their VO2 max for an hour. The next morning, they drank a high-fat, high-sugar shake of some amount of calories, and they did a continuous blood draw to see how fast the body could clear the triglycerides. And the same group did 4 days of very low activity, very few thousand steps, and then did the same exercise input and the same nasty milkshake and the same blood draw follow, and it reduced the efficacy of that training by something like 30 or 40%. Right? So this goes back to the people who are inactive exercisers, right? The people who do nothing and then they're parked at a desk 8 hours a day and then they go on a treadmill for an hour. They don't have the health benefits you would expect given the workload, and that's a problem, right? That explains the lack of benefit from the exercise, because as it turns out, being active improves the quality of the exercise and the health outcomes of the exercise, but it also seems to promote recovery. It doesn't go to infinity, right? It certainly doesn't hamper recovery. If anything, it reminds you why you're working out in the first place, because you get lots of opportunities to be like, oh shit, I can carry this. I've got both my kids on my shoulders. This is a really cool thing. Hey, being strong is really great. Like that. Otherwise, if let's say you can't gain a lot of strength, then you're going to miss out on all those other benefits because you haven't had a chance to see them because they're not staring at you in the mirror.
Yeah, there's something very powerful about opening a jar of pickles for your girlfriend. So no, good
girlfriend
stuff.
Needs to do some grip training.
She's working on it. I've got her on the pull down. I hope you enjoyed that. Before you head off, head on over to corpwarrior.com to get your free ebook with 6 interview transcripts of some of my top guests, including Dr. Doug McGuff, Drew Baye, and Bill Simone, on how to optimize muscle gain, fat loss, and overall health in an efficient, effective, and sustainable way. These transcripts are not verbatim, deliberately. Instead, they've been transcribed in an easy read format to make it more enjoyable and easier for you to quickly pick out what you need and start getting results. To get your ebook, head on over to corpwarrior.com, that's C-O-R-P warrior.com, and enter your email address. Then check your email for an email from me with a confirmation link. Once you click the link, you will be instantly redirected to a PDF version of the transcripts. This episode is brought to you by ARX, aka Adaptive Resistance Exercise, the most innovative, efficient, and effective all-in-one exercise machines I have ever seen. The ARX uses a computer-controlled motor to give the exact amount of resistance your clients need 100% of the time. This means that the resistance can never become dangerous, is intuitive and simple to use, and can provide you with all of the results you and your clients are looking for in a fraction of the time. ARX is highly effective and efficient in delivering all of the benefits of exercise, including increased strength, muscle mass, cardiovascular conditioning, bone mineral density, and injury recovery. As well as being utilized by many high-intensity training trainers to deliver highly effective and efficient workouts to their clients, ARX comes highly recommended by world-class trainers and brands, including Bulletproof, Tony Robbins, and Ben Greenfield Fitness. I was really impressed with my ARX workout. The intensity and adaptive resistance was unlike anything I've ever experienced. I love how the machine enables you to increase the negative load to fatigue target muscles more quickly. I love how the workouts are effortlessly quantified. The software tracks maximum force output, rate of work, total amount of work done, and more in front of you on screen, allowing you to compete with your previous performance to give you and your clients real-time motivation. To find out more about adaptive resistance exercise, please go to arxfit.com and help support my show by mentioning Corporate Warrior in the How Did You Hear About Us field. So again, head on over to arxfit.com and enter Corporate Warrior in the How Did You Hear About Us field to support the show. This podcast is brought to you by hituni.com. Hituni.com are a provider of amazing online courses for high-intensity training qualifications. HitUni comes highly recommended by the best in the field, including Body by Science co-author Dr. Doug McGuff, Discover Strength CEO Luke Carlson, and trainer and founder of Baye.com, Drew Baye. It was founded by my friend, author, and longtime personal trainer Simon Shawcross, who's also been a guest on the podcast. Simon has 15 years experience training clients and has supervised over 50 15,000 high-intensity training workouts. Using knowledge from experts like Skyler Tanner, Dr. James Steele, Dr. Ellington Darden, Hit Uni is a goldmine for learning everything to do with high-intensity training. The courses are delivered online through the website, where you can learn via a variety of multimedia materials at your own pace. There's online support and a discussion forum where you can share ideas and ask for help. To learn more about high-intensity training and improve my own results, I started their personal trainer course. The content is amazing, the courses are really easy to follow, and each section is organised into bite-sized chunks that give you a real sense of achievement after you complete each one. I should also mention there is a DIY course, so this is the course for you if you're not necessarily a personal trainer, but you want to learn more about high-intensity training and how to implement it for maximum benefit in your own exercise regime. To get your exclusive Corporate Warrior 10% discount on any course you purchase, simply head on over to hituni.com, that's hituni.com, and enter the coupon code CW10, that's CW and the number 10. So again, head on over to hituni.com, pick your course, and enter the coupon code CW10 for 10% discount. Thank you for your support.